After studying this module, you shall be able to learn the concept of abuse, dependence and withdrawal symptoms, learn the effects and neurological basis of narcotic drugs, learn the effects and neurological basis of stimulants, understand the effects of hallucinogens and their neurological basis, learn about the common brain areas involved in the abuse and dependence on certain substances. Drug abuse is a common problem of today's world. A large number of drugs have many different kinds of effects, are illegally sold in the market under the different names and brands. They are illegally transited from one country to another and are sold at very high prices. Once addicted, an individual cannot come out of it, and the need to take drug keeps on increasing, driving an individual towards criminal activities to procure money to buy the drug. Substance abuse involves recurrent consumption of the substance, ignoring one's occupational, social and marital duties, continuing to use it in spite of arguments at home and problems with the law, and to keep having it even in hazardous situations like driving or doing industrial work. The dependence or addiction to a substance, on the other hand, involves increased toleration for the substance so that a greater quantity is required each time to get a similar feeling of high, unsuccessful attempts to obtain the substance, and the neglect of all essential duties of living in the society. After getting dependent on the substance, an individual will have withdrawal symptoms if the substance is suddenly withdrawn. If not given immediate medical care, withdrawal could be fatal as well. Substances of abuse have been classified into the following categories. Number 1, narcotics or opioids, including opium, morphine, codeine and heroin, smack or brown sugar, methadone, dope or junk. Second are stimulants, including amphetamines, benzodrines, dexedrines, cocaine, caffeine and nicotine. Third category is sedatives such as barbiturates, seconal, veronal and benzodiazepines. Category 4 is of psychedelic drugs or hallucinogen such as cannabis, marijuana, LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, morning glory seeds or PCB and ecstasy. Fifth category is of anti-anxiety drugs inclusive of Compose, Xanax, Halcyon, Valium and Librium. The neurophysiological effects and the neurological basis of a few substances in different categories of drugs is described below in this module. Let us first understand narcotics or opioids. The following substances are included in this category. First is opium. Opium is a resinous narcotic formed from the latex released by lacerating or scoring the immature seed pods of opium poppies. It contains up to 16% of morphine, an opiate alkaloid which is most frequently processed chemically to produce heroin for the illegal drug trade. Opium has gradually been superseded by a variety of purified, semi-synthetic and synthetic opioids with progressively stronger effects. This process began in 1817 when Frederick Wilhelm reported that the isolation of pure morphine from opium after at least 13 years of research and a nearly disastrous trial on himself and other 3 boys. Next comes heroin. Heroin is an opiate processed directly from the extracts of the opium poppy. Originally, it was created to cure people of addiction to morphine. Doses of heroin were prescribed to people by doctors, but soon it was observed that the people were demanding more and more of it and were getting addicted. Researchers found that soon after the drug was introduced into the bloodstream, heroin crossed the blood-brain barrier system and is converted into morphine. It produced the same effects as that of endorphins, creating a sense of well-being. People taking heroin described euphoria as an orgasm centered in the gut. The most common method of heroin use is via intravenous injections. Now let us understand the second category of stimulants. First comes cocaine. Cocaine is a crystalline propane alkaloid that is obtained from the leaves of the coca plant. It is both a stimulant of the central nervous system and an appetite suppressor, giving rise to a euphoric sense of happiness and increased energy. Its effects can last from 20 minutes to several hours, depending upon the amount taken, purity, and the method of administration. Initial signs of stimulation are hyperactivity, restlessness, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, and euphoria. This euphoria is sometimes followed by a period of discomfort and depression. Sexual interests are amplified. Overusage might result in paranoia, impotence, twitching, etc. Next comes crack cocaine. Crack cocaine, often called as crack, became popular during the 1980s. Producers began to omit the step of removing free base precipitate from the ammonia mixture. Also, filtration processes were also omitted. Baking soda is mostly used as a base. The effects and the withdrawal symptoms are quite similar to cocaine. Next comes methamphetamine. Popularly known as meth or ice, methamphetamine is a stimulant and sympathomimetic drug. Meth enters the brain and triggers the release of neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. It stimulates the mesolimbic reward pathway and causes euphoria and excitement, which makes people addicted to it. Users often develop obsessive behaviors like cleaning, hand washing, assembly or disassembling objects. Withdrawal symptoms include excessive sleeping, eating, and depression-like symptoms accompanied by anxiety and drug craving. The pleasure pathway in the brain includes dopaminergic system and its endorphin producing neurons. The pathway begins in the midbrain. The ventral tegmental areas or the VTA of the brain system continues in the nucleus accumbens and goes up to the frontal cortex. The stimulant substances directly stimulate the dopamine systems while others work by inhibiting GABA, which indirectly makes dopamine more available. The researchers believe that there may be other pleasure pathways available and more research is needed into it. Polysubstance abuse is a serious problem in this context. It can also lead to cross tolerance, in which one drug leads to the toleration of some other drug too, making the process of the treatment more difficult. It may also lead to synergistic effects. This multiplicative effect increases the potency of each drug. Such a condition may also lead to antagonistic effects, in which metabolism of one drug is blocked by another drug, again making the process of detoxification very difficult and may also lead to prolonged withdrawal symptoms. Next comes the category of hallucinogens. Hallucinogenic compounds found in some plants and mushrooms or their extracts have also been used mostly during religious rituals for centuries. Almost all hallucinogens contain nitrogen and are classified as alkaloids. Many hallucinogens have chemical structures similar to those of natural neurotransmitters, example acetylcholine, serotonin or catecholamine. While the exact mechanisms by which hallucinogens exert their influence remain unclear, research suggests that these drugs work at least partially by temporarily interfering with the neurotransmitter action or by binding to their receptor sites. They all have these common effects, including distortion of sensory perception and other psychic and somatic effects. These drugs also exhibit cross tolerance. This means that the user of a hallucinogenic drug develops a higher tolerance to hallucinogens with more usage and the shorter time span in between last usages. Hallucinogens have been used in the history for many reasons, but cultural and religious are the main ones. For example, the drug mescaline was used in the Native American society as a part of their ritual ceremonies in the 60s and the 70s. Its usage became popular with the coming of the hippie movement. Psychedelic drugs are psychoactive substances whose primary action is to alter the function of the brain. It is believed that these drugs block or suppress signals related to everyday functions from reaching to the conscious mind. These signals are presumed to originate as related to several other functions of the brain, like sensations, emotions, memories, and the unconscious or the subconscious mind. This effect is sometimes referred to as mind expanding or consciousness expanding, as our conscious mind is constantly being scratched or assaulted by things normally inaccessible to it. After a certain point, it can overwhelm the sense of self and can result in a dissociative state. Now let us discuss marijuana. Cannabis or marijuana in its herbal form is a psychoactive product of the plant, Cannabis sativa. People have been consuming cannabis since a long time. It became very popular in the 20th century. It has been used for its recreational, religious, spiritual and medicinal purposes. Its physiological effects are produced when it is consumed by smoking or ingestion. The minimum amount of THC required to have a perceptible psychoactive effect is about 10 micrograms per kilogram of body weight. The state of intoxication due to cannabis consumption is colloquially known as a high, a state where mental and physical faculties are noticeably altered due to consumption of cannabis. Its effect on the individual depends on the potency, dose, chemical composition and the method of consumption. Next comes the drug called as ecstasy. Ecstasy or MDMA is a semi-synthetic psychedelic enactogen of the phencylamine family that produces much more stimulant-like effects than most of the other common trip-producing psychedelics. Mainly a recreational drug, it is often associated with sex and other club drugs. The primary effects include an increased awareness of the senses, feeling of openness, euphoria, empathy, love and happiness, heightened self-awareness, feeling of mental clarity and an increased appreciation of art and music. For some users, tactile sensations are enhanced and the physical pleasure is heightened. Side effects include jaw clenching, elevated pulse, anxiety, etc. Next comes the drug LSD. LSD or lysergic acid diethylamide or LSD-25 or acid as commonly called is a semi-synthetic psychedelic drug of the tryptamine family. It is one of the most potent mood-changing chemicals which was discovered in 1938 and is manufactured from the lysergic acid which is found in the ergot, a fungus that grows on rye and other grains. It is mainly a recreational drug and entheogen. LSD's psychological effects, colloquially called as trip, vary from person to person and depend on various factors like dosage, previous experiences, state of mind and environments, etc. LSD trip can have long-term psycho-emotional effects and it also causes significant changes in one's personality and life. Widely different effects emerge. The set is the general mindset of the user and the setting is the physical and the social environment in which the drug's effects are experienced. LSD is sold in tablets, capsules and occasionally liquid form. Thus, it is usually taken orally. LSD is often added to absorbent paper which is then divided into decorated pieces, each equivalent to one dose. The experience or the trips are long typically and they end after about 12 hours. Under the influence of LSD, sensations and feelings change much more dramatically than the physical signs. LSD can make people experience numerous emotions at the same time, and if taken in large doses, it can make the person experience strange visual and audio hallucinations. The user's sense of time and self is altered. Experience may seem to jump over different senses, giving the user the feeling of hearing colors and seeing sounds. These changes are often frightening and can cause panic. Some LSD users experience severe terrifying thoughts and feelings of despair, fear of losing control or fear of insanity and death while using LSD. Hence, most of the LSD users report seeing ghosts or being in contact with the superpower. LSD users can also experience flashbacks or recurrences of certain aspects of the drug experience. Flashbacks are very sudden and often come without warning and may do so within a few days or more than a year after LSD use. In some individuals, the flashbacks can persist and cause significant depression, distress or impairment in social or occupational functioning, a condition known as hallucinogen-induced persisting perceptual disorder or abbreviation form as HPPD. Psilocybin mushrooms. Psilocybin is obtained from certain types of mushrooms that are indigenous to tropical and subtropical regions of South America, Mexico and the US. These mushrooms typically contain less than 0.5% of psilocybin plus trace amounts of psilocin, another hallucinogenic substance. Psilocybin mushrooms containing psilocybin are available fresh or dried and are typically taken orally. Psilocybin and its biologically active form psilocin cannot be inactivated by cooking or freezing preparations. Thus, they may also be brewed as tea or added to other foods to mask their bitter flavor. The effects of psilocybin, which appears within 20 minutes of ingestion, last approximately 6 hours. Psilocybin mushrooms are fungi that contain the psychedelic substance psilocybin and psilocin and occasionally other psychoactive tryptamines. The most popular colloquial term for psilocybin mushrooms is magic mushrooms or shrooms. When this drug is ingested, it is broken down to psilocin, which produces the hallucinogenic effects. The intoxicating effects last typically anywhere from 3 to 7 hours depending on the dosage, preparation method and the personal metabolism. The experience is typically inwardly oriented with strong visual and auditory components. Visions and revelations may be experienced and the effect can range from exhilarating to distressing. There can also be a total absence of effects even with large doses. Next comes Phencyclidine or PCP. PCP was developed in the 1950s as an intravenous anesthetic. Its use has since been discontinued due to serious adverse effects. PCP is a white crystalline powder that is readily soluble in water or alcohol. It has distinctive bitter chemical taste. PCP can be mixed easily with dyes and is often sold on the illicit drug market in a variety of tablet, capsules and colored powder forms that are normally snorted, smoked or orally ingested. For smoking, PCP is often applied to a leafy material such as mint, parsley, oregano or marijuana. Depending upon how much and by what route PCP is taken, its effects can last approximately 4 to 6 hours. PCP is a dissociative drug formerly used as an anesthetic agent exhibiting hallucinogenic and neurotoxic effects. It is commonly known as angel dust, but it is also known as wet, Sherm, Sherman Hemsley, rocket fuel, Ashy Larry, Sherman's tank, Walk Hawk, Hogan, Ozone, Hannah, Hog, Manitoba, Schlimbo and embalming fluid are among other names. Although the primary psychoactive effects only last few hours, the total elimination from the body extends till weeks. PCP is consumed in a recreational manner by drug users, mainly in the US where the demand is met by illegal production. It comes in both powder and liquid forms, but typically it is sprayed onto a leafy material such as marijuana, mint, oregano, parsley or ginger leaves and smoked. PCP has potent effects on the nervous system, altering perceptual functions like hallucinations, delusional ideas, delirium or confused thinking. It affects the motor functions and symptoms include unsteady gait, loss of coordination and disrupted eye movement or nystagmus. This drug also affects the ANS leading to rapid heart rate and altered temperature regulation. The drug is also known to alter mood states in an unpredictable fashion, causing some of the individuals to become detached and others to become animated. Next comes peyote. Peyote is a small spineless cactus in which the principal active ingredient is mescaline. This plant has been used by natives in the northern Mexico and the southwestern US as a part of religious ceremonies. Mescaline can also be produced through chemical synthesis. The top of the peyote cactus, also referred to as the crown, consists of disc-shaped buttons that are cut from the roots and dried. These buttons are generally chewed or soaked in water to produce intoxicating liquid. The hallucinogenic dose of mescaline is about 0.3 to 0.5 grams and its effects last about 12 hours. Because the extract is so bitter, some individuals prefer to prepare a tea by boiling the cacti for several hours. The long-term residual psychological and cognitive effects of mescaline, peyote's principal active ingredient, remains poorly understood and studies are still being carried out in this field. A recent study found no evidence of psychological or cognitive deficits among Native Americans that use peyote regularly in a religious setting. It should be mentioned, however, that these findings may not generalize to those who repeatedly abuse the drug for recreational purposes. Its effects can be similar to those of LSD, including increased body temperature and heart rate, uncoordinated movements or ataxia, profound sweating and flushing. The active ingredient mescaline has also been associated in at least one part to fatal abnormalities. Peyote abusers may also experience flashbacks. Now let us come to the neurological basis of hallucinogens. LSD, peyote, psilocybin and PCP are drugs that are responsible for causing hallucinations, which are profound distortions in a person's perception of reality. Hallucinogens are drugs that can make people see images, hear sounds and feel sensations that seem real but are not. Sometimes hallucinogens also produce rapid, intense emotional swings. Drugs like LSD, peyote and psilocybin starts by disrupting the interaction of nerve cells and the neurotransmitter serotonin. As we know, the serotonin system is distributed throughout the brain and spinal cord and is involved in the control of behavioral, perceptual and regulatory systems including mood, hunger, body temperature, sexual behavior, muscle control and sensory perception. On the other hand, PCP acts mainly through a type of glutamate receptor in the brain that is important for the perception of pain, responses to the environment and learning and memory. It is quite possible to have a bad reaction to hallucinogenic drugs. This is also referred to as bad trip and may cause panic, confusion, suspicion, anxiety and loss of control. The long-term effect of these drugs can be quite dangerous. These long-term effects may include flashbacks, mood swings, impaired thinking and unexpected outbursts of violence and eventually possibly depression that may lead to death or suicide. The effects that hallucinogenic drugs have on the brain are quite complicated and very interesting. Many users of hallucinogenic drugs have experienced whole personality changes, which raises questions about the relationship between brain and behavior. Now let us understand the abuse of hallucinogens and psychopathology. Because of the inadequate reporting and problems in interpreting symptoms and causes, it is hard to estimate how common adverse reactions are. At Bellevue Hospital in New York, from early 1965 to 67, 200 patients appeared with complaints related to LSD, including mostly panic reactions and flashbacks. By 1969, Bellevue was seeing only one LSD reaction every 2 weeks, and the most of these were thought to be borderline schizophrenics in whom the drug had precipitated a psychosis. In 1971, a Canadian government survey of the hospital records of 22,885 psychiatric patients found 67 cases, that is 0.3%, were LSD cases where LSD was mentioned as a factor in the primary diagnosis. Most of these patients had used many drugs and the precise influence of LSD was not clear. A questionnaire survey by J. Ungerleider and his colleagues suggested a much larger number of adverse reactions. The period covered was July 1, 1966 to January 1, 1968, and the questionnaire was sent to 2,700 physicians, psychiatrists, psychologists and other health professionals in Los Angeles County. Of the 1,584 who replied, 27%, including 47% of psychiatrists, had seen severe adverse effects of LSD. The total number of adverse reactions was 8,958. Unfortunately, the definition of adverse reaction was left to the respondents, and the effect the author suggests was probably to define anything that made a drug user seek professional help as an adverse reaction. The prevailing social attitudes have to be taken into account. For example, it is suspicious that in the same survey, 1,887 adverse reactions to marijuana were reported. Many of the adverse reactions may have been nothing more than difficult moments during drug trips that were mentioned in psychiatric interviews because they seemed relevant to the problem under discussion. Some may have seen simply drug-induced insights that made people believe that they needed help. Nadich has found through questionnaires that adverse reactions to LSD and marijuana, defined essentially as bad trips, strong and pleasant feelings, panic, fear of insanity or death, thoughts of suicide, are associated with high scores on psychological test scales, representing schizophrenic tendencies, social maladjustment and regression. Hakimian and Gershon examined 47 patients admitted to Bellevue Hospital between January and July 1967 after using a psychedelic drug in the preceding 48 hours. In 31 cases, psychotic conditions already present were intensified. Ultimately, 32 were diagnosed as schizophrenic, 4 as schizoid, 6 as sociopaths, and 5 as depressive or neurotic. The authors were struck by the frequency of pre-existing schizophrenia. Now let us summarize what all we have learnt in this chapter. First of all, that various substances may be abused or one may become physiologically dependent on them. Sudden withdrawal of the substance may lead to life-threatening withdrawal symptoms. Opium-containing substances produce euphoria and depress the brain, whereas the stimulants heighten activity of the central nervous system. The hallucinogens produce hallucinations and alter the state of consciousness of the individual. They cross the blood-brain barrier and enter tissues of the brain. Several neurotransmitters, including endorphins, are involved in the process. Brain areas like nucleus accumbens play a significant role in this.